I still remember that morning vividly, as if the air itself carried a warning I refused to notice. The sun had just begun to rise, painting faint orange streaks across the tired rooftops of our old neighborhood. My knees ached as I walked slowly toward the familiar bank branch on the corner. For years it had been a ritual of comfort each month. On this very date, I would withdraw my pension. It was not much, but it was mine. A symbol of all the long decades of work I had given, the sacrifices I had made, and the promise that at least in old age, I could live with dignity. The guard at the door greeted me politely. Inside, the bank smelled faintly of paper and polished wood, the same way it always had. I smiled faintly, remembering how my husband once stood in these lines with me, until his death left me navigating the world alone. I stepped up to the counter, handed my card to the young teller, and waited. Seconds passed. Then minutes. I noticed her brows furrowing, her fingers tapping more quickly on the keyboard. She leaned closer to the screen, whispering to her colleague. A strange chill crept up my spine. Finally, she looked at me, her expression awkward. "Ma'am," she said softly, "there are no funds available in this account." I blinked, not sure I had heard her correctly. "What do you mean? Today is the disbursement date. My pension always comes in by the 5th. Please check again." She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "I've checked, ma'am. Your pension is no longer deposited here. It seems the payment has been redirected to another account." The word slammed into me like a blow. Redirected? How could that be? My voice trembled. "That's impossible. I have not changed anything. I've been receiving it here for years." Her eyes darted away, as if she wanted to avoid the storm building in mine. "Perhaps you should speak with the management, or with your family, if they handled any documents for you." Her suggestion hit me with sudden, cruel clarity. My family, my son, my daughter-in-law. The bank felt colder now, the polished wood no longer warm but alien, hostile. My hands shook as I clutched the counter. Around me, the quiet hum of other customers blurred into noise. My chest tightened with the dreadful thought that the two people I had trusted most might have touched what was not theirs. I forced a smile, nodded at the teller, and walked out with dignity, though inside my heart was unraveling. On the sidewalk, the city bustled as if nothing had changed, but for me, everything had. My pension was not merely money, it was my medicine. It was the food on my table. It was the only assurance that, even if forgotten, I could at least survive without stretching out my hands. And now it was gone, vanished without my consent. I sat on the bus bench outside the bank, the hard metal biting into my back. My reflection in the glass window looked older, smaller, defeated. I whispered under my breath, as though speaking might make sense of it. How? Who? Why? Memories flooded me of my son as a boy, clutching my hand on his first day of school, promising to take care of me when I grew old. Of the nights I stayed awake sewing his uniforms under dim light, sacrificing meals so he would never go hungry. I thought of my daughter-in-law, smiling sweetly as she poured me tea, insisting she only wanted what was best for the family. Could it be them? Could they have? My heart resisted the thought, but my mind refused to let go. The teller's hint, the missing money, the sudden silence in my account, it all pointed in one direction. I felt a knot tightening in my chest. A part of me wanted to believe there was some mistake, some clerical error that would be fixed by tomorrow. But deep inside, a darker suspicion whispered the truth I feared to name. My pension had not been lost, it had been taken. And if my suspicion was right, the betrayal was not from strangers, but from my own flesh and blood. Before everything unraveled, my life had settled into a kind of rhythm, quiet, predictable, sometimes lonely but safe. I lived in the same modest house where I had raised my son, a 2-story building with peeling paint and a garden that still bloomed with the roses I had planted decades ago. Every morning, I watered those flowers, whispering to my late husband as if he lingered among the petals. The neighborhood children often greeted me on their way to school, and I would smile, remembering how small feet once echoed down these same sidewalks. My son and his wife had moved into the upstairs rooms 2 years ago. At first, it seemed like a blessing. After my husband's death, the silence of the house weighed heavily on me. Their laughter, their footsteps, the scent of freshly cooked meals drifting from the kitchen, it all gave me comfort. I told myself that this was how family should be: close, supportive, united by love. But little cracks had already begun to form, long before I noticed them. My daughter-in-law often insisted on handling my errands. "Mother, give me your pension card," she would say sweetly. "I'll withdraw the money for you. You shouldn't trouble yourself with long lines at the bank." At first, I accepted her help, grateful for the convenience. My knees ached. My back was weak. Why shouldn't the younger ones lend a hand? Yet there were moments small, almost invisible, that unsettled me. Times when I asked about the balance and her answer came too quickly, as if rehearsed. Times when my son avoided my gaze whenever money was mentioned. I told myself I was overthinking. They were family. Family would never betray. In the evenings, I would sit by the window, sipping tea, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. Downstairs, I kept a ledger where I recorded each expense: groceries, utilities, medicine. I had lived my entire life with discipline and frugality, never wasting, always saving. That pension, though small, represented my independence. Without it, I would be at the mercy of others. I remembered the early days of my marriage. My husband and I worked tirelessly, side by side, never complaining. When the factory closed, we sold handmade goods just to keep food on the table. We endured so much, believing that someday, when our hair turned gray, we would rest in peace, sustained by the modest pension promised to us. That dream kept us going. When he passed away, that pension became my anchor. I told myself that as long as it came each month, I could survive without begging, without feeling like a burden. But now, the anchor had been cut loose, and I was adrift. The night after my visit to the bank, I prepared dinner as usual. The smell of rice filled the kitchen, and the sound of sizzling vegetables in the pan seemed to mock my heavy thoughts. My son arrived home late, his shirt smelling faintly of alcohol, his laughter too loud. My daughter-in-law followed, her heels clicking across the tiled floor. We sat at the table together, the three of us, bowls clinking, chopsticks moving in rhythm. They spoke about trivial things: his promotion at work, her shopping trip with friends. I nodded, pretended to listen, but inside, a storm brewed. The bank teller's words replayed over and over. Redirected, another account. I wanted to ask them outright, to demand an explanation, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I watched them closely, the way she avoided my eyes, the way he drowned himself in conversation that skirted around anything personal. My suspicion grew, feeding on every small detail. Later that evening, I overheard them whispering in the hallway. My name floated between their voices like a curse. I pressed my ear against the wall, but their words dissolved into muffled tones. Still, I caught enough. She doesn't need it all. We're the ones paying bills. Think of the future. The future? Whose future? Theirs, surely not mine. That night I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the house I once called safe. Every sound became suspicious, every shadow a threat. I thought about the documents I had signed in the past year's small papers, brought to me with hurried explanations. Just a bank update, Mother. Just a formality. I had trusted them, signed without reading every line. My hands trembled as I remembered. Could it be that I had given them the power without realizing it? Had my own trust betrayed me? The next morning, I opened the drawer where I kept my bank book and pension records. Pages were missing. Receipts I clearly remembered saving were gone. My chest tightened as realization crept closer, heavier, undeniable. This was not an accident. The roses in the garden swayed gently in the breeze, their beauty mocking the turmoil inside me. To outsiders, my home must have looked peaceful, a picture of harmony. Mother, son, daughter-in-law, living together under one roof. But within those walls, seeds of betrayal had already been sown, waiting to grow into something poisonous. And I, the woman who had built this family with my own hands, was beginning to sense that my place in it was slipping away, erased not by strangers, but by the very blood I had nurtured. The days that followed were heavy with silence, though life on the surface appeared unchanged. I still woke before dawn, boiled water for tea, and swept the front steps, but every sound seemed sharper now: the broom scratching the tiles, the faucet dripping into the sink, the whisper of my son's shoes on the stairs. I could no longer look at him or his wife without feeling a sting behind my ribs. The first quarrel came over something small, trivial, almost laughable in another world. I had bought a bag of rice from the market with a few coins I had tucked away. When my daughter-in-law saw it, she frowned as though I had committed a crime. "Mother," she said, her voice coated with false sweetness, "you shouldn't spend on things we already buy. It's wasteful. You know we handle the groceries." I forced a smile. It wasn't much, just a small sack. "I like this brand. It tastes softer." Her smile froze. "But it's not about taste. It's about money. Every little purchase adds up." She turned to my son, who sat slouched at the table scrolling his phone. "Isn't that right?" He barely looked up. "Yeah, Ma, you don't need to buy anything. We've got it covered." The words stung, though spoken casually. Covered. As if my contribution, my savings, my careful budgeting all these years were meaningless. I nodded, swallowing my hurt, but inside the unease grew. That night, when I cooked a small portion of the rice for myself, the difference in taste was real warm, fragrant, like the meals I once made for my family. Yet even as I ate, I felt guilty, as though I had stolen something that rightfully belonged to them. Another quarrel followed soon after. The electricity bill had come, higher than usual. My daughter-in-law placed it on the table with a sigh, her eyes sharp. "See, Mother, this is why we need your pension in one place. Costs keep rising. We can't manage everything alone." I froze, the bank teller's words echoing in my mind. My pension. Their pension now, it seemed. "I never asked you to manage it," I whispered. "I only ever wanted to handle my own expenses. I never asked you to pay for me." Her eyes narrowed, her voice hardening beneath the sugar. "But you live here. Everything you use, electricity, water, food, it's all part of the household. Isn't it fair that we manage it as one?" My son said nothing. His silence hurt more than her words. He sat there, chewing his food, pretending this was not a battlefield. I looked down at my hands, calloused from years of labor, trembling now as they held chopsticks. "Fair," I said quietly. "Fair would be letting me keep what is mine. Fair would be trusting that I can manage myself." Her lips curled into a smile that was not a smile. "Mother, we only want what's best. You're too old to worry about money. Leave it to us." Too old. The phrase cut deep, sharper than any blade. I had given my youth, my body, my future for this family, and now, in the autumn of my life, I was being told I was too old to hold the very fruit of my labor. That evening, I retreated to my room, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and sorrow. I opened the small wooden box where I kept my ledger, running my fingers over the empty pages where receipts once lived. I remembered how carefully I had once documented every cent, every coin, like a soldier counting rations during wartime. It was my discipline, my pride. Now, stripped of that, I felt naked. The cracks widened further at the Sunday family dinner. Relatives had come by, filling the house with chatter and the aroma of roasted chicken. At first, the noise was comforting, but as dishes were passed around, my daughter-in-law spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "We've had to take on more responsibility lately," she said, smiling at an aunt across the table. "Mother doesn't really manage her money anymore. We handle it for her." My face burned. Whispers rose around me like smoke. An uncle chuckled. "That's good. That's good. The young should take care of the old." I wanted to scream, to tell them it wasn't care, it was theft. But my throat closed, and all I could do was sit there, cheeks flushed, gripping my chopsticks until my knuckles turned white. Later, when everyone had left, I confronted my son in the kitchen. "Why did you let her say that? Why didn't you defend me?" He avoided my gaze, busying himself with the dishes. "Ma, it's not worth making a scene. People will think you're ungrateful." Ungrateful. The word hung in the air like poison. I turned away before he could see the tears in my eyes. My voice was little more than a whisper. "Everything I am, everything I have was for you, and now you call me ungrateful." That night I lay in bed, listening to the sound of their laughter upstairs. The house I had built with love now echoed with betrayal. The cracks in the family table had become canyons, and I knew deep inside that what had begun with missing rice and whispered bills was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. The quarrels multiplied, growing like weeds that choked the peace from my home. It was no longer just about groceries or bills. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my independence was being carved away piece by piece. One afternoon, I decided to go to the pharmacy by myself. My knees were weak, but the fresh air helped me breathe. I needed my blood pressure medicine, and I had always managed to handle such errands. When I returned, a small paper bag of pills tucked carefully under my arm, my daughter-in-law was waiting at the door. Her eyes flashed the moment she saw the bag. "Mother, what is this? You went out again? Didn't I tell you to leave these things to us?" I held the bag close. "It's only my medicine. I've bought it myself for years." She snatched it from my hands, pulling out the receipt. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is too expensive. You shouldn't spend without asking us first." My chest tightened. "Without asking? This is for my health. Must I seek permission to breathe now?" Her smile was sharp. "You don't understand, Mother. You don't see the bigger picture. Every unnecessary expense puts strain on the household. If you need something, tell us. We'll decide." "We'll decide." The words struck like iron bars locking a door. That evening, my son echoed her sentiment. "Ma, you know she's right. We're just trying to help. You don't need to stress yourself. Just let us handle the money." I stared at him, my own flesh and blood, unable to recognize the boy I had raised. My heart screamed, but my lips remained sealed. Soon the restrictions spread. When I went to the market with a few coins I had saved, she scolded me for buying fruit. "We already bought bananas. Why waste money on apples too?" If I placed a small donation into the church box, she pulled me aside later, reminding me that charity begins at home. Even the clothes I wore were scrutinized. "You don't need new shoes, Mother. You barely leave the house." Bit by bit, I felt myself shrinking, my world narrowing until it fit inside the palm of her hand. The walls of the home I had built now pressed against me, suffocating. Then came the humiliation that shattered whatever pride I had left. One Sunday afternoon, neighbors gathered outside to chat. I joined them, longing for a taste of normalcy, of human connection. As we sat on the bench by the garden, laughing over shared memories, my daughter-in-law suddenly appeared, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mother, you left the lights on again this morning. Do you know how much that adds to the bill? We can't afford careless mistakes." The laughter died. The neighbors shifted awkwardly, their eyes darting between us. My face burned hot, my tongue frozen in my mouth. She wasn't finished. "And please, stop giving small gifts to those children down the street. Candy costs money, and you don't need to spoil them. We're already managing enough." I wanted to vanish into the earth, to be scolded like a child in front of strangers. Me, the woman who had once carried entire seasons of hardship on her back. I forced a weak smile, nodding as though I agreed. Inside, something cracked. That night, I stared at the ceiling, my body trembling with rage and shame. I whispered to my late husband, asking him if this was what we had worked for all our lives. Did our sacrifices mean nothing? Was this the dignity we were promised in old age? But alongside the despair, a spark ignited, a small flame, but fierce. If they had truly taken my pension, if they had signed papers, changed accounts, shifted what was rightfully mine into their hands, I would find out, and I would not remain silent. The next morning I dressed carefully, combed my hair, and held my head high. I told them I was going for a walk. Instead, I returned to the bank. The clerk recognized me, her eyes soft with sympathy. I requested a printout of recent transactions. My hands trembled as I scanned the paper. There it was clear, undeniable. A change in deposit account details, signed with my name. Only it wasn't my handwriting. My breath caught. My legs nearly gave way. I clutched the counter to steady myself. Forgery. Betrayal carved in ink. The world blurred as I stepped outside, the paper burning hot in my pocket. My mind spun with questions, but one truth cut through the fog. I was not imagining things. My son and his wife had stolen from me, not by accident or oversight, but with deliberate, calculated deceit. The walls of my home were no longer walls. They were prison bars. And now, I had to decide, would I continue living quietly behind them, or would I fight my way out? I walked home gripping the printout so tightly that the edges cut crescents into my palms. The afternoon heat pressed down on the street, warping the air above the asphalt, but a coldness lived under my skin. Each step felt like a negotiation between fear and resolve. Children shouted somewhere down the block, and a vendor's bell chimed faintly. Life went on, simple and noisy, while a piece of paper in my pocket redefined everything I thought I knew. When I reached the gate, the roses bowed in the wind as if in sympathy. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, breathing in the familiar smell of soap and cooked rice. My son's shoes were by the stairs, neatly aligned, the way he used to leave them when he was a boy, and I praised him for being tidy. I remembered his small hand in mine, how he once cried when I ran out of coins for ice cream, and promised me that one day he would buy me anything I wanted. I held that promise like a talisman for years. Now, it cut me like glass. I climbed the stairs to the living room. My daughter-in-law was scrolling through her phone, legs crossed, a cup of coffee steaming on the table. She looked up, surprised by the determination on my face, then smoothed her expression into the pleasant smile she wore like perfume. "Mother, you're back early. Do you want tea?" Her voice floated lightly, the way one speaks to a skittish animal. I sat down across from her. The paper crackled as I unfolded it and laid it between us. She glanced at it, then away, feigning indifference. "What's this?" she asked, though the slight tightening around her eyes betrayed her. "Bank records," I replied. "They show a change in deposit account. They show my pension redirected. They show my name signed." I touched the false signature with a fingertip. "Only it isn't mine." A beat of silence passed. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs a pipe clinked. She exhaled through her nose, the smallest sound of irritation. "Mother, you're overreacting." We talked about consolidating accounts to manage household expenses. "Remember? You signed something." I signed nothing like this. My voice was steady, steadier than I felt. "Where is the document?" She shrugged. "In a drawer. Somewhere. You know how paperwork is. But it's done. You don't have to worry about it." "I worry because it is mine," I said quietly. "My labor, my husband's years, the food that kept you fed lives in those numbers." Her smile thinned. "We're the ones paying the bills now. We cover everything you use. Why can't you be grateful?" I folded the paper, slid it back into my pocket and stood. "Call my son." She hesitated, then raised her voice toward the staircase. He came down quickly, hair damp, the scent of aftershave clinging to him. For a moment, I saw the boy who used to run down those steps, eager for breakfast. Then he saw the look on my face and stopped at the last stair. "What happened?" he asked. "Sit," I said. Saturday I placed the printout on the table again. He didn't touch it. He stared at it the way people stare at funerals, careful not to get too close. "I went to the bank," I said. "There's been a change in the deposit account for my pension. My name is signed, but it is not my hand." He swallowed. The muscle in his jaw tightened. "Ma, it's not what you think." "What do I think?" I asked, though I knew exactly what I thought. "That you took what belonged to me. That you decided I was an expense to be managed." He spread his hands, an old gesture of surrender that used to soften me. "We did it for the household, for stability. You keep forgetting small things. You misplace receipts, leave lights on. Do not make my age your excuse," I said, and I heard my husband in my voice, firm and unyielding. "Do not turn care into control." He glanced at his wife. She tilted her chin almost imperceptibly, a signal I recognized too late, the choreography of their unity. He reached for the paper, scanning it. "We just redirected it. Temporarily. To keep things organized." "Then undo it," I said. "Today." My daughter-in-law laughed softly, a sound without warmth. "It's not that simple. There are forms, processing times, and, frankly, we've already planned next month's budget with that money. If we undo it now, we will be short." I stared at them, the son I raised, the woman he chose, and realized that every kindness I had offered had been neatly stacked into a pile they called obligation. The coffee on the table sent up small white ghosts of steam. I wanted to sweep the cup to the floor, to shatter something as my heart was shattering, but I didn't. I folded my hands. "You forged my signature," I said. "That is a crime." My son flinched. "Ma, I will go to the bank again, and to the authorities if I must," I continued. "I will ask for footage, for records, for every pen stroke. If you believe I am too old to fight, you are about to meet the woman who kept you alive through winters you don't remember." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a fleeting instant his face softened, as if the boy inside him had clawed to the surface. Then my daughter-in-law touched his arm, and the softness vanished. "You're making a scene," she said. "This is family." Family. The word fell between us like a cracked plate. I stood, the chair legs scraping the floor. "Return my pension. Transfer every remaining cent to my account. Bring me the documents you made me sign. You will do this by tomorrow." "Or what?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Or you will discover that the quiet ones are not weak. We are reservoirs, and reservoirs have floods." I turned and walked to my room. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish. On my dresser, the wedding photo of my husband and me stared back, 2 young faces lit by a future we believed in. I placed the folded printout behind the frame, the safest place I knew, and pulled out my old ledger, the one with dog-eared corners and pages stained by decades of living. I began to write, not expenses now, but a record of events. Dates, words said, changes noticed, small humiliations, the exact phrasing they used. If they wanted to turn my life into paperwork, I would meet them on that battlefield. Night fell heavy. I heard their voices upstairs, muted and urgent. My name drifted through the ceiling like smoke. I lay awake counting time by the ticking clock on my wall. At some point, rain began, tapping gently at the window. I thought of all the storms I had weathered: job loss, illnesses, death, and felt, under the fear, the old bone-deep endurance settle in my chest. In the morning, I dressed in my best blouse and pinned a small brooch at my collar, a gift from my husband on our 30th anniversary. I made tea, sat at the table, and waited. When they came down, I gestured to the chairs. "No more pleading, no more explanations. Today," I said, "we go to the bank together." My daughter-in-law opened her mouth to protest. I lifted a hand, palm outward, the way one calms a startled horse. "Together," I repeated. "You will bring the documents. You will stand beside me while we correct the account. If you refuse, I will proceed alone, and I will not stop at the bank." The room held its breath. My son's eyes flickered from my face to the brooch, to the teacup trembling only slightly in my hand. He nodded, tiny, reluctant. "Fine," he said. "We'll go. The first battle, then. Not the war, but the first real line drawn." I took one last sip of tea, tasting the faint bitterness of oversteeped leaves, and felt a steady heat kindle low in my body. I would walk into that bank, not as a confused old woman, but as a witness to my own life. Let them bring their papers. I had brought my courage. The next morning dawned gray, clouds heavy with the threat of rain. I tied my scarf firmly under my chin, slipped the ledger into my handbag, and clutched the pension printout like a weapon. My son trailed behind me, silent, his steps slow as though every pace toward the bank dragged chains around his ankles. My daughter-in-law walked beside him, her heels sharp against the pavement, her lips pressed into a thin, calculating line. Inside the bank, the air was cool and sterile, humming faintly with fluorescent lights. The same teller from before recognized me, her polite smile faltering when she saw the tension coiled in our trio. I stepped forward, shoulders squared. "I need to speak with your manager," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She hesitated, then nodded, disappearing into the back. Moments later, a man in a gray suit emerged, his expression professional, practiced. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" I placed the printout on his desk. "This account was changed without my consent. My pension has been redirected. I want it restored immediately." He adjusted his glasses, scanning the document. "According to our records, the request to redirect was signed by you, ma'am. We have the authorization form on file." "Then bring it here," I demanded. My son shifted uncomfortably. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms, her nails tapping impatiently on her sleeve. The manager returned with a file, sliding it across the polished wood. There it was, the form, my name scrawled at the bottom, a signature pretending to be mine. I pointed to it, heat rising in my chest. "This is not my handwriting. I never signed this." The manager's brows drew together. "Forgery is a serious accusation, ma'am. If you wish to pursue this, we would need to involve the authorities." "Do it," I said without hesitation. For the first time, my son's mask cracked. "Ma, don't. This will only cause trouble for everyone. It's just money, we can settle it at home." "Just money?" My voice shook the air. Customers turned their heads. It is my survival. It is my husband's sweat, my sleepless nights, my broken back. Do not dare call it just money." The room held its breath. Even the manager looked startled by the force in my words. My daughter-in-law leaned forward, her tone sharp. "She's confused. She's old. She forgets things. That signature is hers, she probably doesn't remember." I snapped my gaze to her. "Do not mistake memory for weakness. I remember every hour I worked to earn this pension, every form I ever signed, and I would never sign away my right to live." The manager cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should request handwriting verification. We can have the form analyzed." "Do it," I repeated. He nodded slowly. "It will take time. In the meantime, your pension payments cannot be rerouted until this is resolved." I felt a flicker of relief, but it was smothered quickly by the venom in my daughter-in-law's eyes. "You're embarrassing us," she hissed under her breath as we walked out. "In front of strangers. In front of your neighbors who bank here." I stopped on the steps outside, turning to face her. Rain had begun to fall, soft drops landing on my scarf. "The only embarrassment," I said, "is that my son's wife believes theft is care." Her face twisted, but she said nothing. My son stood between us, his shoulders slumped, his silence louder than words. That night at home, the atmosphere was thick as tar. They avoided me, whispering in their room upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table, my ledger open, documenting everything: the date of the bank visit, the manager's name, the forged form, every word exchanged. My pen moved like a blade across the paper, carving truth into permanence. But my relief was short-lived. 2 days later, a letter arrived in the mail. It bore the stamp of the pension office. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The letter confirmed that, according to their system, I had authorized my son to act on my behalf regarding pension matters. Effective immediately, he was listed as the primary recipient. The room spun. I read the lines again and again, until the words blurred. My heart pounded in my ears. They had gone further than I imagined. Not just the bank official documents now bore his name, tethered to mine like a leash. I stumbled into the living room, holding the letter out. "Explain this," I demanded, my voice breaking. My son took it, his jaw tightening. He didn't meet my eyes. "It's legal, Ma. It's done. I'm your representative now." Representative. A word meant to protect had become a weapon to control. "You tricked me," I whispered. "You used my trust to chain me." He said nothing. My daughter-in-law smirked, leaning against the wall. "It's better this way. You won't have to worry anymore. We'll take care of everything." My vision blurred with tears, but beneath the sorrow a fire burned hotter. They had underestimated me. They thought age dulled my mind, that grief for my husband had softened my spine. But I still had fight in me. I retreated to my room, clutching the letter, and fell to my knees before the old chest where I kept my husband's belongings. Inside was a bundle of documents: our marriage certificate, his employment records, the pension approvals. I pressed them to my chest like armor. "Help me," I whispered into the stillness, as though my husband could hear. "Guide me. Give me strength." Outside, thunder cracked, shaking the windows. Rain hammered the roof, as if the heavens themselves bore witness. This was no longer a family quarrel. This was war. The storm outside had passed, but inside our home the air was thicker than ever. Days trickled by, filled with forced smiles and half-spoken words. My son no longer looked me in the eye. My daughter-in-law walked around the house with a triumph she barely bothered to conceal, her heels clicking on the wooden floor like the sound of a lock turning. When Sunday came, she suggested hosting a family dinner. "It will ease the tension," she said with a bright smile, though her eyes gleamed with something else, something sharp. I knew better, but I agreed. Perhaps, I told myself, sitting with relatives might remind them of the shame they ought to feel. Perhaps, surrounded by witnesses, they would reconsider. By late afternoon, the house buzzed with voices. Cousins, aunts, uncles, they filled the dining room, carrying dishes, pouring tea, laughing over stories. For a brief moment, I almost believed we were a family again. The scent of roasted chicken and sweet bean soup filled the air, mingling with the warmth of chatter. Then, like a blade slipping between ribs, my daughter-in-law raised her voice. "You all know," she said sweetly, glancing at me. "Mother doesn't handle her pension anymore. We take care of it now, for the sake of the household. It's safer this way." The table quieted, every eye shifting toward me. My cheeks burned, my heart hammered. I tried to swallow, but my throat had turned to sand. An uncle chuckled, lifting his cup. "That's good. The young must care for the old. It's the natural way." Another relative nodded. "Exactly. What's the point of pensions if not to support the family?" Their words fell like stones. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. My daughter-in-law's smile widened, savoring my silence. "She's too forgetful these days," she continued. "She nearly misplaced her medicine last week. Imagine if she also misplaced her money. We just want her to rest." Laughter rippled around the table, awkward but persistent. My son said nothing, chewing slowly, his gaze fixed on his plate. The humiliation stung worse than any wound. To be stripped of dignity in front of my own kin, to be painted as incompetent, helpless, it was a cruelty beyond theft. My fingers tightened around my chopsticks until they threatened to snap. I wanted to speak. I wanted to shout that I was not forgetful, that the signature on those forms was forged, that my own son had betrayed me. But the words tangled in my chest. Pride, grief, fear of further disgrace, they all chained me to silence. Instead, I lowered my gaze, pretending to busy myself with my food. The broth tasted like ash on my tongue. After dinner, as relatives prepared to leave, one aunt patted my shoulder. "You're lucky, you know," she said kindly. "Many old mothers don't have children to look after them. At least yours are taking care of you." I forced a smile that felt like glass cracking. "Yes," I whispered. "I am lucky." When the door closed behind them, the silence roared. I turned to my son and daughter-in-law, my hands trembling. "Why would you humiliate me like that? Why parade my affairs before everyone?" My daughter-in-law tilted her head, feigning innocence. "We only spoke the truth. You should be grateful. We saved you from embarrassment. What if you had said something wrong about your finances? People would worry." I shook my head, my voice breaking. "You stole from me, and now you steal my dignity." She stepped closer, her tone icy. "Your dignity means nothing if you can't survive without us. Face it, Mother, the world doesn't belong to you anymore. You're old. We are the future." My son shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, his silence stabbing deeper than her words. I stumbled back to my room, closing the door behind me. The walls pressed in, the muffled sound of their voices rising again in the kitchen. I sat on the edge of my bed, tears slipping down my cheeks unchecked. For years, I had lived with the belief that family was sacred, that blood would always protect, not wound. But tonight, surrounded by laughter that mocked me, I realized that even blood could turn into a blade. I opened my ledger and wrote every detail of the evening, the words spoken, the looks exchanged, the way my relatives laughed. Each stroke of my pen was heavy, deliberate. This was no longer simply about money. This was about survival, about reclaiming the piece of myself they had tried to erase. I closed the book, pressing it against my chest. The paper inside felt warm from my touch, almost alive. "They will not break me," I whispered into the dark. "Not yet. Not ever." And though my heart was bruised, a seed of defiance rooted itself deeper, waiting for the day it would grow strong enough to tear through the soil of their deceit. A week passed after that dinner, each day stretching like a taut string ready to snap. I moved around my own home like a shadow, careful, silent, waiting. My son avoided me, and my daughter-in-law watched me with a hawk's eyes, as though every step I took needed monitoring. I told myself to stay calm, to gather strength, but humiliation has a way of building pressure inside the chest until it must explode. The moment came at the market. I had gone with only a few bills tucked into my sleeve, enough for vegetables and fish. The market smelled of damp earth and frying oil, voices rising and falling like waves. For a few minutes I felt free again, haggling over prices, touching fresh produce, chatting with neighbors who still greeted me warmly. But as I paid the fishmonger, I felt a hand on my wrist. My daughter-in-law stood beside me, her lips tight, her eyes cold. "Mother," she said loudly enough for the stall owner and nearby shoppers to hear, "why are you spending money again without telling us? We already bought fish this morning." I froze, the coins trembling in my palm. "It's just a small piece," I whispered. "I wanted to cook a dish I used to make for your father." She plucked the bag from the stall, waving it in the air. "Do you see? She wastes money, buying what we don't need. No wonder we had to take control of her pension. The crowd shifted, curious eyes landing on me. Heat rose up my neck, my ears burned. The fishmonger looked at me with pity, his hands pausing mid-count. I wanted to vanish, to sink into the stones beneath my feet. But instead, something inside me broke open. Enough! My voice rang louder than I expected, carrying across the crowded stalls. Heads turned. Children stopped mid-play. You speak of waste while you drive a new car bought with my pension. You speak of control while you forge my name. Do not pretend this is care, it is theft. Gasps rippled through the bystanders. My daughter-in-law's eyes widened, then narrowed into slits. You're delusional, she snapped. You don't know what you're saying. I pulled the folded printout from my bag, the one I had carried everywhere like a shield. My hands shook, but my words were steady. This is proof. My pension was redirected without my consent. If anyone here doubts me, look. The crowd leaned closer. Some whispered, others frowned at her. For the first time I saw her mask slip, panic flickering beneath the arrogance. My son arrived then, rushing through the throng, his face pale. "Ma, please," he begged, reaching for my arm. "Don't do this here." I yanked my arm free. "Why not here? Why not now? You silenced me in our home, humiliated me at our table. But out here, among witnesses, I will not be quiet." The market buzzed with tension. A woman shook her head, muttering, "How could a son do this to his own mother?" Another added, "Shameful." My daughter-in-law's lips trembled with fury. "This is family business," she hissed. "You have no right to drag outsiders into it." I straightened my back, feeling taller than I had in years. When family betrays, outsiders are the only ones left to hear the truth. The fishmonger gently pushed the bag toward me. "Take it, ma'am. No charge today." His eyes held sympathy, but also something sharper judgment directed at my son and his wife. I clutched the bag to my chest, tears pricking my eyes. Not tears of defeat this time, but of release. The truth was out. No longer hidden in ledgers or whispered in corridors, their betrayal had been named. My son pulled at his wife's arm. "Let's go," he muttered, shame finally visible in the slump of his shoulders. She resisted, but the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, heavier. Reluctantly, she let him drag her away. I stood alone, the rain beginning to drizzle through the open market roof. The coins were still in my hand, damp and warm. Neighbors touched my shoulder gently as they passed, offering quiet words of support. That evening, the house was silent. They did not speak to me, nor I to them. The tension was a living thing, filling every corner, but for the first time I felt stronger. They had wanted to silence me, to make me small. Instead, I had spoken, and others had heard. I sat at my desk, opened my ledger, and wrote, "Today, at the market, I named them. I am no longer alone in knowing. The world knows, too." The ink bled slightly where my hand trembled, but I pressed harder, ensuring the words were carved into the page. When I closed the book, I looked toward the ceiling, toward the room where they whispered and plotted. "You think this is the end?" I murmured. "It has only just begun." The rain outside tapped the roof like an impatient drum, echoing the rhythm of my resolve. After the market incident, whispers spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Neighbors who once greeted my son with warmth now eyed him with suspicion. Women at the communal well lowered their voices when my daughter-in-law approached. Even the local shopkeeper, who had always laughed with them, grew curt. Their smiles faltered in public, though inside the house, their arrogance returned sharper than ever. But I knew the storm was not yet over. Public humiliation had only cracked their armor, it had not broken it. They still held the pension account, the forged documents, and the audacity to act as though I were the liar. The final spark came during a family reunion at my cousin's home. Relatives gathered for my niece's engagement, the air thick with laughter, clinking glasses, and the aroma of simmering broth. I arrived quietly, clutching the same handbag that had carried my ledger and bank printouts for weeks. My son and daughter-in-law walked ahead of me, their backs straight, faces painted with charm. At first the gathering felt warm. Old cousins hugged me, recalling childhood memories. My niece blushed shyly beside her fiancé. For a fleeting moment I breathed easier, but peace never lasted long in their presence. As the meal began, my daughter-in-law raised her glass, her voice carrying across the table. "We've taken on new responsibilities recently," she said smoothly. Mother no longer worries about money. We manage her pension for her, so she can enjoy her old age without stress." The words struck me like a slap. My spoon clattered against the bowl. Laughter rippled through the room, some approving, some awkward. An elderly cousin chuckled. "Ah, how lucky you are, sister. Children who take care of everything. That's true filial piety." Filial piety. The phrase sliced deep, a mockery of the very thing that had been stolen from me. I pushed back my chair slowly, my knees trembling but my voice steady. "It is not filial piety to steal," I said, the room falling silent at once. "It is not care to forge a mother's name. Do not mistake control for devotion." Gasps filled the air. My niece's eyes widened, her fiancé froze mid-bite. All heads turned to my son, whose face drained of color. My daughter-in-law's smile faltered, then hardened. "She's confused," she said quickly, her tone brittle. "You all know how memory fades. She doesn't remember signing the forms." "Enough!" I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing. "Do not speak of memory. I remember every stitch I sewed to clothe him, every coin I saved to educate him, and I remember with perfect clarity that I never gave away my pension." I pulled the folded printouts from my bag, laying them flat on the table. "Here, proof from the bank, proof of forgery. If you doubt me, look." The relatives leaned forward, murmuring, their faces darkening as they read. My cousin, a retired teacher, frowned deeply. "This is serious. If true, it is a crime." My son's lips parted, but no words came. His silence screamed louder than denial. My daughter-in-law, cornered, lashed out. "So what if we redirected it? We pay the bills, we run the household. She would waste it on useless things, candies for strangers, offerings at the temple." "Useless?" My voice shook with fury. "Every coin I spend is mine. Mine. The right I earned with sweat and sacrifice. You call generosity waste, yet you buy handbags with stolen money." The room erupted. Aunts gasped. Uncles muttered. Cousins exchanged scandalized glances. My niece's eyes filled with tears, horrified that her engagement dinner had become a battlefield. One uncle slammed his cup down. "Shame on you! To steal from your own mother, it is unforgivable." The weight of their judgment bore down. My son lowered his head, shame etching lines into his face. My daughter-in-law's cheeks burned crimson, her lips pressed tight, but she said no more. I gathered the papers, sliding them back into my bag. My hands shook, but my spine remained straight. "I will not be silenced again," I declared. "I will take this matter to the authorities. If blood cannot protect me, the law will." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the distant clatter of dishes in the kitchen. After the dinner ended, relatives approached me quietly, offering support, promising to testify if needed. Their hands on mine felt like lifelines, small anchors against the storm. At home that night, the walls trembled with their rage. My daughter-in-law slammed doors, my son muttered curses under his breath. But I no longer cowered. I sat at my desk, writing each word into my ledger, documenting the humiliation, the confrontation, the witnesses who had seen the truth. The storm had gathered. The next battle would not be whispered or hidden, it would be fought in the open, under the harsh light of justice. I looked at the photo of my husband, his eyes steady, his smile faint. "I am not alone anymore," I whispered. "The world knows now, and I will not stop until they return what is mine." Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the garden roses in a ghostly glow. Their petals shook in the wind, but they did not break. Neither would I. The house had grown colder since the reunion. My son no longer met my gaze. My daughter-in-law stalked the halls with clipped footsteps and muttered complaints. Their hostility was no longer veiled. But I had stopped shrinking from it. I had taken the first step, speaking my truth aloud, and now the path forward was clear. I needed proof, irrefutable and sharp, to place in the hands of justice. The morning after the confrontation, I dressed carefully in a dark blouse and long skirt, my hair pinned neatly back. With my handbag clutched close, I left the house before they awoke. The streets were quiet, slick from last night's rain, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth. My heart pounded, but my steps did not falter. At the bank, the same manager greeted me with a wary look. I asked for copies of all forms related to my pension account over the past 2 years. He hesitated, warning me it would take time. I leaned closer, letting him see the determination in my eyes. "Take the time. I will wait." Hours passed. I sat on the stiff lobby chair, clutching my handbag, ignoring the curious glances of customers. At last, he returned with a folder thick with documents. I opened it carefully, my fingers trembling. There it was again, my name scrawled across pages I had never seen, signatures crooked imitations of my hand. And there my son's name listed as my representative, authorized to receive and manage my pension. Anger and grief surged through me, but I steadied my breath. "I want official statements that these forms were filed here," I told the manager. "Stamps, dates, copies for my record." He hesitated, then nodded. "If you intend to pursue this legally, you'll need them." I left the bank with the folder pressed tightly against my chest, as though it contained not just evidence, but pieces of my stolen life. The next step was the pension office. The building loomed gray and bureaucratic, its corridors smelling of old paper and dust. I waited in long lines, explained my case to clerks who raised their brows, whispered among themselves, then directed me to another counter. Each time I repeated my story, my voice grew stronger, more certain. Finally, an official reviewed the documents, frowning deeply. "This signature does not match the one we have on your original pension application," he admitted. "We can request an investigation, but you'll need to file a formal complaint and provide handwriting samples." "I will," I said without hesitation. Back home, I retrieved my old records, my marriage certificate, my employment letters, even faded receipts signed in my hand. I laid them out on the table like a mosaic of my life. My hands shook as I wrote new samples for comparison, the ink blurring slightly where my eyes watered. Every loop of my letters felt like an oath. This is me. This is mine. This is the truth. That evening, my son confronted me. His face was pale, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Ma, why are you doing this? Do you really want to drag our family through the courts?" I looked at him, my heart breaking and hardening all at once. "Do you think I wanted this? That I wished to fight my own blood in public? You left me no choice. You took my name, my money, my dignity. Now I take back my truth." He dropped his gaze, but my daughter-in-law stepped forward, her voice sharp as glass. "Even if you go to court, what do you think will happen? Judges favor the younger generation. They'll say you're senile, confused. No one will side with you." I held up the folder, the stamped copies glinting under the light. "Then let the evidence speak louder than age. Let the truth burn brighter than your lies." Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. My son turned away, shoulders slumped, caught between shame and defiance. That night I tucked the folder beneath my pillow, unable to sleep without feeling its weight near my heart. In the silence, I whispered to my late husband, "They thought I was weak. They forgot who I am. They forgot whose wife I was. You fought your battles with calloused hands and aching bones. Now it is my turn." In the days that followed, I visited the notary office to certify my statements. I asked neighbors and relatives who had witnessed the public confrontations to write testimonies. Some hesitated, fearing conflict, but others agreed, their words trembling on paper yet strong in meaning. Each page added to my growing arsenal. Meanwhile, the tension in the house became unbearable. My daughter-in-law slammed cupboards, muttered about betrayal, accused me of destroying the family. My son barely spoke, avoiding me at every turn. But I no longer cowered. I moved with quiet purpose, the folder always near, the ledger always open. By the end of the week, I had assembled a pile of evidence, forged forms, certified handwriting samples, witness statements. The sight of it filled me with both dread and power. Dread, because this battle would tear my family apart. Power, because for the first time in months, I held something solid in my hands, something that could not be dismissed as the confusion of an old woman. I sat at my desk, pen poised above the ledger, and wrote, "I have gathered the truth. Tomorrow I will place it in the hands of the law. Let them decide, but let it be known I did not surrender. I did not bow." As I closed the book, thunder rumbled again in the distance, faint but insistent. The storm was not over. It was only gathering strength, and this time, I would not face it in silence. The morning I carried my folder to the district office, the air felt heavy with both dread and hope. The building loomed before me, its stone steps slick from last night's drizzle. My knees protested with every climb, but my grip on the folder tightened, steadying me. I had lived a life of endurance. What were a few more steps compared to the years I had already carried on my back? Inside, the clerk led me to a small room with pale walls and flickering lights. A young officer sat at the desk, his pen poised, his expression politely skeptical. I placed the folder before him, the weight of months of betrayal landing with a thud. "I am here to file a formal complaint," I said, my voice low but steady. "My pension has been stolen through forged documents. My son and daughter-in-law are responsible." He raised his brows, flipping through the papers. At first, his eyes slid over them with routine disinterest. But as he reached the forged signature, the mismatched handwriting, the certified samples, his gaze sharpened. "This is serious," he murmured. He looked up at me, his voice softer. "Did you bring witnesses?" "Yes," I replied, sliding forward the written statements from my cousins and neighbors. Their shaky handwriting filled the pages, describing the humiliations they had witnessed, the public confrontations. "I am not alone in this. Others have seen. Others know." He nodded, gathering the documents into a neat pile. "We will need to investigate. It will take time, but your case is valid." The words loosened something in my chest. For weeks I had been gaslit into doubting my own mind, my own memory. Now, at last, someone in authority had acknowledged the truth. When I returned home, the house was thick with tension. My son stood by the window, staring out as though the street could answer for him. My daughter-in-law hovered nearby, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp. "Where were you?" she demanded. "At the district office," I answered calmly. "I have filed a complaint. The law will handle this now." Her face drained of color, then flushed crimson. "You dare drag us into this publicly. Do you know what people will say? Do you know what shame you've brought?" I met her fury with quiet resolve. "Shame belongs to those who steal, not to those who defend themselves." My son turned then, his face pale, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, he slumped into the chair, burying his face in his hands. For the first time, I saw not arrogance, but fear. That night, I overheard them arguing upstairs. Their voices rose and fell like crashing waves. "You told me she wouldn't fight," my son hissed. "You said she'd never go this far." "She's bluffing," my daughter-in-law snapped back. "She's old. The system is slow. By the time anything happens, we'll have moved everything." "Everything?" His voice cracked. "We already took too much. If they prove forgery." I pressed my ear to the wall, my heart pounding. Every word was confirmation, a nail in their own coffin. The next day, an officer visited the house. He wore a simple uniform, his notebook tucked under one arm. My neighbors gathered outside, watching curiously. "Madam," he said, addressing me with respect, "we are beginning our investigation. I need to speak with you first." He asked about the pension, the forms, the signatures. I answered carefully, presenting the folder once more. My daughter-in-law tried to interrupt, her voice sharp with protests, but the officer silenced her with a firm hand. "This is a legal inquiry," he said. "You will have your turn." For the first time, she looked unsettled. Her usual smirk faltered, replaced by tight lips and darting eyes. My son sat silently in the corner, his shoulders hunched, avoiding the officer's gaze. When the officer left, the house erupted. "You've ruined us!" my daughter-in-law shouted, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. "Do you think anyone will hire him now? Do you think we'll survive this scandal?" I stood firm, my voice calm despite the tremor in my hands. "You ruined yourselves the moment you signed my name on papers that were not yours to touch." She glared at me, her eyes full of venom, but beneath it I saw fear creeping in, fear of consequences she never thought would come. That night, as the house settled into uneasy silence, I wrote in my ledger once more. "The law has begun to listen. Their armor is cracking. They thought I was powerless. They forgot that truth itself is a weapon." I placed the ledger beside my bed, my hand resting on its cover as though it were both shield and sword. Sleep came slowly, but when it did, it was deep. For the first time in months, I dreamed not of loss, but of justice. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying whispers of change. The storm was not yet over, but its direction was shifting. The following week unfolded like a slow drumbeat of reckoning. Each day brought another knock at the door, another summons, another question asked by men in uniform whose pens moved swiftly across notebooks. The air in the house grew heavier with each visit. My daughter-in-law began keeping the curtains drawn, as though shutting out the neighbors' eyes could erase the shame. One afternoon, 2 officers arrived carrying a folder of documents. They asked us all to sit in the living room, me in my chair by the window, my son stiff beside me, my daughter-in-law perched on the sofa, her posture a mix of defiance and unease. The officer opened the folder. "We've compared the pension forms on file with certified samples of your handwriting, madam," he said, nodding toward me. "The differences are clear. We also found inconsistencies in the dates and in the identification documents attached to the requests. They appear altered." My daughter-in-law shifted, her fingers tightening around the hem of her dress. "Altered? That's ridiculous. She probably just forgot what she signed. She's old." The officer raised a hand. "Enough. We also have testimonies from bank staff who recall seeing someone else submit the forms. Not her." The silence that followed was suffocating. My son's head dropped into his hands. My daughter-in-law's face blanched, her bravado slipping. "This is not just a family matter anymore," the officer continued. "It is a legal matter. Forgery and misappropriation of pension funds are serious crimes." The words fell like stones into the stillness. For the first time I felt the weight lifting, not gone, but shifting away from me and onto the ones who had wronged me. After the officers left, the house erupted. "You've destroyed us!" my daughter-in-law screamed, her voice shrill, echoing through the halls. "Do you know what prison means? Do you want your son to rot behind bars?" I stood slowly, my hands trembling but my voice firm. "I did not destroy us. You destroyed us the day you signed my name without my hand. The day you turned care into chains." She glared at me, venom dripping from her eyes, but I did not flinch. My son finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Why did you do it?" he asked her, his gaze darting to his wife. "You told me it was just a formality, that it was for the good of the family." She spun on him, her tone sharp as a blade. "Don't pretend you didn't know. You enjoyed the car, the trips, the comfort. You didn't question where the money came from." He recoiled as though struck. The truth had surfaced, not only in documents but in words too raw to take back. That night, their voices thundered upstairs, accusations hurled back and forth. I sat in my room, the walls trembling with the force of their unraveling. I opened my ledger, writing it all down. The officers confirmed forgery. Witnesses spoke. Their unity crumbles now, each blaming the other. The truth cannot be buried any longer. The following days brought more revelations. A neighbor confided to me that she had once accompanied my daughter-in-law to the bank, watching as she filled out papers with a forged hand. A cousin admitted he had overheard them boasting about redirecting my pension to build a better future. Each testimony became another thread in the web, tightening around them. But the most damning evidence came when the officers returned with bank security footage. Grainy but clear enough. My daughter-in-law at the counter, sliding papers across, her head bent low. My son stood behind her, glancing around nervously. When confronted with the footage, they had no words. My son stared at the floor, shame radiating from his silence. My daughter-in-law opened her mouth, then closed it, her confidence crumbling. The officers looked at me then. "You will need to prepare for hearings," one said. "Are you ready?" I straightened my back, my voice steady. "I have waited my whole life to live with dignity. Yes, I am ready." That night, as I sat alone with the folder of evidence, I touched the photo of my husband on the wall. "We are closer now," I whispered. "The truth is surfacing. They thought I was powerless, but they forgot that the past holds its own strength. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, it was not for nothing. I will reclaim what is mine." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, carrying the smell of damp earth. I closed my eyes, feeling not just the ache of betrayal but the first fragile breath of vindication. The battle was not yet won, but for the first time, I believed victory was possible. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, its walls echoing with voices that carried both authority and fear. I walked slowly down the corridor, clutching the folder of evidence against my chest. My steps echoed, steady but heavy, as though each carried the weight of decades, the years I had worked, the sacrifices I had made, the nights of hunger endured so my son could eat. Today, all of it would be laid bare in a room of strangers. My son and daughter-in-law were already there when I entered. He sat with slumped shoulders, eyes fixed on the floor. She, by contrast, sat upright, her hair immaculate, her lips painted, her expression defiant, her gaze cut toward me like a blade, but I did not look away. The judge called the room to order. My heart pounded, but my spine remained straight. I was not only an old woman, I was a witness, a victim, and today, a fighter. The officer presented the evidence, the forged documents, the handwriting comparisons, the testimonies of neighbors and relatives, and finally, the grainy bank footage. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the image of my daughter-in-law appeared on the screen, sliding papers across the counter with my son standing beside her. The judge's gaze was stern. "Do you deny this is you?" he asked her. She faltered but quickly regained composure. "I was only helping my mother-in-law. She gave me permission. She forgets now, but she told me to do it." I stood then, my voice trembling but clear. "I gave no such permission. I never signed away my pension. Every document with my name is a lie. These hands," I held them up, gnarled and trembling, "have written thousands of signatures in my life. That one is not mine." The courtroom fell silent. My words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The judge nodded slowly, then turned to my son. "And you? Do you admit to this?" My son's lips parted, but no sound emerged. His eyes filled with something raw fear, shame, regret. At last he whispered, I didn't stop her. I knew what she did, and I let it happen." A murmur rippled through the room. I closed my eyes, the confession striking like both a wound and a balm. He had admitted it at last, but the boy I once knew was gone, replaced by a man who had bartered his conscience for comfort. The prosecutor pressed further. The funds withdrawn from the pension account were used for personal luxuries, a new car, vacations, shopping. None of it went to the care of the complainant. I looked at my son then, and for a brief moment he met my eyes. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "Forgery and misappropriation of pension funds are punishable by law. This is no trivial matter." My daughter-in-law finally snapped. "She's making herself the victim. We sacrificed for this family too. We worked hard. Why shouldn't we benefit from her pension? It's all for the family." Her words rang shrill, echoing against the walls. The judge raised a hand, silencing her. "Benefit does not mean theft. Family does not mean ownership." I felt tears prick my eyes, not of weakness but of vindication. For months, I had been silenced, dismissed, humiliated. Now the truth was no longer mine alone. It belonged to the room, to the law, to justice. But then came the twist I had not expected. The prosecutor laid down a final piece of evidence, a notarized document signed weeks before the forgery was discovered. It was a loan agreement. My son and daughter-in-law had borrowed heavily in his name, using my pension as collateral. The debt was vast, the kind that could swallow a household whole. My breath caught. "A loan?" I whispered. The prosecutor nodded. "Yes, they risk not only your pension but your home as well. If payments are not met, foreclosure is possible." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. My knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of the bench for support. It wasn't just my pension they had stolen. They had gambled with the roof over my head, the very walls that held my memories, the roses in the garden I had tended for decades. My daughter-in-law's mask shattered. She shouted at my son, "You said she'd never find out. You said we'd manage the debt before anyone noticed." The judge banged the gavel, demanding silence. My son buried his face in his hands, broken. I closed my eyes, my chest aching with both fury and sorrow. They hadn't merely taken money. They had tried to erase the very foundation of my life. When the session ended, the judge announced that sentencing would follow after further review. But I no longer felt powerless. The truth was out. Their schemes had been dragged into the light. As I left the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the steps in gold. I paused, inhaling deeply. The air was cool, sharp, alive. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. I whispered to myself, "Justice walks slowly, but it walks." The courthouse steps still echoed in my ears days after the hearing. Every night, I replayed the words of the prosecutor: loan, collateral, foreclosure. My home, the place where I had raised my child, where I still spoke to my late husband in whispers, had been placed on the gambling table without my consent. The thought haunted me like a specter in the dark. The authorities moved quickly now. Investigators visited again, this time armed with bank records and loan agreements. They questioned not only my son but also my daughter-in-law, separating them into different rooms. I watched from the hallway, clutching my ledger like a shield. Hours later, the lead investigator approached me. "Madam, there's something you should know. Your son signed the loan documents, but it was his wife who orchestrated everything. She prepared the forms, coached him on what to say, and ensured the pension was rerouted to make repayments. He wasn't the mastermind she was." The words landed heavy, though I had long suspected it. My son, weak and pliable, had bent to her will, but weakness does not erase guilt. He had allowed her hand to guide his, had chosen silence instead of resistance. That evening the confrontation came. I sat in the living room, the roses outside swaying in the twilight breeze, their petals catching the last light. My son and daughter-in-law entered, summoned by the weight of what could no longer be denied. I looked at her first. "Tell me, why? Why target me, when all I ever did was open my home to you?" Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "Because you cling to the past, to your little pension, your ledgers, your scraps of independence. You don't see the future. Money should serve the living, not gather dust in the hands of the dying." Her words pierced, cruel and cold. "And my son?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You dragged him into this? Or did he follow willingly?" She glanced at him, a flicker of disdain in her eyes. "He followed because he's weak. He never had the courage to stand up to me or to you." My son flinched as though struck. He looked at me then, his eyes brimming with tears. "Ma, I thought it was just paperwork. She said it was for the family. I didn't know about the loan until it was too late. I swear I didn't." I shook my head slowly. "You knew enough. You saw my name forged. You watched as they stripped me of dignity in front of our relatives. You said nothing." His tears fell, splattering on the polished floor. "I was afraid to lose her, afraid to lose everything." "You have already lost everything," I whispered. The room fell silent, heavy with the weight of truth. Later that week, the final piece of evidence emerged. The investigators presented recordings from a call intercepted between my daughter-in-law and a creditor. Her voice was sharp, impatient. "Don't worry. The old woman won't fight. Her pension is ours. The house will be ours too. She's too frail to resist." When this was played in court, the last mask slipped. Gasps filled the room. Even my son recoiled, covering his face with trembling hands. The judge's voice was stern, unwavering. "The evidence leaves no doubt. Forgery, fraud, and misappropriation have been proven. Sentencing will follow. The law will take its course." I sat motionless, my hands folded in my lap, as though carved from stone. Inside, my heart thundered. I had braced for humiliation, for dismissal, for being called senile. But now, the truth had triumphed. After the hearing, as we stepped outside, reporters' voices swirled, neighbors whispered, relatives avoided my son's eyes. My daughter-in-law tried to push past them, her once proud posture crumbling into frantic movements. My son lingered behind, his shoulders sagging. "Ma," he said softly, brokenly, "can you ever forgive me?" I looked at him long, seeing both the boy I once held and the man he had become. "Forgiveness is not mine to give yet," I replied. "You must first forgive yourself, and then face what you have done. Until then, forgiveness is just another lie." His eyes welled, and he bowed his head. That night, I sat by the window, the roses glowing faintly in the moonlight. I pressed my husband's photo to my chest. "It is nearly over," I whispered. "Justice is near, but the cost, oh, the cost." I had won the truth, but in winning, I had lost the son I once knew. The courthouse was crowded on the day of sentencing. Relatives who once laughed at my humiliation now sat stiffly in the benches, avoiding my eyes. Neighbors had come too, whispering among themselves. I walked slowly down the aisle, leaning on my cane, my heart heavy but resolute. At the front, my son and daughter-in-law waited. She was as defiant as ever, her chin lifted, though her eyes darted nervously around the room. My son looked smaller somehow, diminished, his shoulders caved as though the weight of his choices pressed down like iron. The judge read the charges in a steady voice: forgery, fraud, misappropriation of pension funds, falsification of identification documents. Each word was a hammer striking stone, carving their sins into permanence. When asked if they had final statements, my daughter-in-law launched into excuses. It was for the family. We sacrificed too. Why should she hoard her money when we were drowning in debt? We only did what was necessary. Her voice rose, brittle, frantic, but the judge silenced her with a sharp bang of the gavel. Then it was my son's turn. He stood slowly, trembling, his eyes finally lifting to meet mine. "Ma," he said, his voice breaking, "I was wrong. I should have stopped her. I should have protected you, not betrayed you. Every night since this began, I have heard your voice in my head, the way you used to sing me to sleep, the way you promised me that hard work would keep us safe, and he choked on the words. I broke that promise. I failed you." His tears fell freely, and the courtroom grew quiet. My heart twisted. For months I had dreamt of this moment, not his tears, but his admission. And now that it had come, it did not bring triumph, only sorrow. I remembered him as a child, clutching my hand, begging me not to leave him on his first day of school. I remembered the boy who once stood proudly with his diploma, thanking me for sacrifices I had made. That boy had been swallowed by greed, but in this moment I saw a flicker of him again. The judge turned to me. "Madam, would you like to address the court before sentencing?" I rose slowly, my knees trembling, my cane steadying me. The room hushed. "I am an old woman," I began, my voice low but carrying through the silence. "I do not have many years left. My pension was not wealth. It was survival. It was the promise that after decades of work, I would not beg for bread, nor medicine, nor shelter. It was my independence, my dignity. They tried to take that from me. But more than money, they tried to take my voice. They told me I was too old, too weak, too forgetful to matter. Today, I stand here to prove that I do matter. That all of us, the old, the forgotten, matter." I turned to my son then, my eyes wet. "You broke me, but you also broke yourself. I wanted to leave you a legacy of pride, not shame. And now the world will remember not what you achieved, but what you destroyed." He lowered his head, sobbing quietly. My daughter-in-law shifted in her seat, her lips pressed tight, fury flickering even now. I looked back to the judge. "Do what is just. For them, for me, for everyone who believes that truth still holds power." The gavel struck. The words of sentencing followed years of imprisonment for forgery and fraud, financial restitution to repay what was taken, and a formal restoration of my pension. The courtroom murmured, the sound like wind through dry leaves. My daughter-in-law gasped, her defiance crumbling into shrill protests. "No, this is wrong. I did nothing." She was dragged from the courtroom, her cries echoing in the hall. My son remained seated, his face buried in his hands, shaking. As the guards approached, he looked at me one last time. His lips moved silently. "I'm sorry." My heart splintered. Justice had been served, yet the cost was unbearable. I had reclaimed my pension, but I had lost my child to shame and chains. When the room emptied, I sat alone for a moment, the folder of evidence resting on my lap. My hands trembled as I closed it. Around me, the benches were quiet, the air heavy with the echoes of what had just transpired. I whispered to my husband's photo in my mind. "We won, but we lost too. The law gave me justice, but nothing will give me back my son." The sun outside was bright as I stepped into the open air. It warmed my face, but inside, the chill remained. Justice had come, but justice is never the same as peace. The days after sentencing moved slowly, heavy with silence. Neighbors stopped by to offer kind words, but their eyes carried pity I did not want. Relatives phoned, some to congratulate me for standing firm, others to whisper that family should never have been dragged into court. I thanked them politely, but their voices blurred like static. The truth was, victory did not feel like victory. I woke each morning to a house stripped of noise. No footsteps upstairs, no clatter of dishes, no shrill laughter echoing down the hallway. At first, the silence was a relief, but soon it became a hollow ache. The room seemed larger, emptier, every corner echoing with memories I could not banish. My pension was restored. The first deposit arrived in my account, and the teller at the bank smiled warmly when she handed me the receipt. "You fought well, ma'am," she said softly. I nodded, clutching the slip as though it were a lifeline. The numbers printed on it were small, but they meant survival. They meant dignity. Yet when I held the receipt in my hand, I did not feel triumph. I felt the sting of tears. For what use was money when the face of my son haunted me each night? Eyes swollen with regret as he whispered, "I'm sorry," before the guards led him away. At the market, women approached me with admiration. "You were brave," one said. "You showed them that age is not weakness." Another added, "You're an example for us all." I smiled faintly, thanked them, and walked home with my groceries. But behind their praise, I heard the whispers that followed. Her own son. Imagine the shame. How could blood turn against blood? Back in the garden, I tended my roses. Their petals glistened with dew, their fragrance sweet against the morning air. I trimmed the dead leaves carefully, whispering to the plants as I once whispered to my child when he was small. Grow strong. Endure the storms. Bloom again. One evening, I received a letter from the prison. It was from my son. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. "Ma, I know I do not deserve forgiveness. Every day in here, I remember your face in court. I hear your words. I feel the shame of what I allowed to happen. I wanted to make life easier, but I became blind, weak. I let her lead me, and I let greed silence me. I am sorry. I do not ask you to forgive me, but I beg you to remember me as your son, not just as your betrayer." Tears blurred the ink. I pressed the paper to my chest, rocking gently in my chair. Part of me wanted to burn the letter, to erase the pain. But another part, the part that had once cradled him, nursed him, believed in him, clung to it. He was both, my son and my betrayer, my blood and my wound. The days passed, each one carrying the same rhythm: the bank, the market, the garden, the ledger. I documented everything still, though now the pages bore not accusations but reflections. "Justice has been done," I wrote, "but justice cannot mend what has been broken inside a mother's heart. My daughter-in-law did not write. I heard rumors she cursed me in prison, blaming me for her downfall. I did not answer those whispers. Her absence was a relief, her silence a balm. But the absence of my son was a wound that refused to close. Sometimes, at night, I would set the table for two, placing his bowl opposite mine, as though he might walk through the door again. The chair remained empty, but the act gave me comfort. It reminded me that though he had betrayed me, he had once been my child, the boy who cried when he scraped his knee, who once whispered he would care for me when I was old. The neighbors often told me I had been brave, but bravery felt hollow when I lay awake listening to the ticking clock, the house pressing down on me like a tomb. I wondered if justice always carried such a cost. One evening, I sat by the window as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the roses. I whispered to my late husband's photo. "I won, but at what price? They gave me back the pension, but they took our son from us. Would you have wanted this ending?" The silence offered no answer, only the rustling of leaves in the wind. I closed my eyes, feeling the ache of both triumph and loss. Justice had been served, yes, but justice is not healing. Justice is not love. And so I waited for time, for forgiveness, for some future where the weight of justice would not feel so heavy upon my shoulders. The seasons turned quietly after the trial. Spring crept into summer, the garden roses blooming with stubborn resilience. Their red petals burned bright against the pale walls of the house, as though reminding me that life insists on beauty even when hearts are broken. Each morning, I walked to the bank, the pension slip warm in my hand. The clerks greeted me with gentle smiles now, no longer skeptical of my words. They knew my story. Everyone did. Some offered nods of respect, others whispers of pity. I accepted both with the same faint smile, because neither could change the truth. I had won, but victory had carved something out of me. The pension kept me alive, paid for medicine, for rice, for the quiet dignity of independence. Yet every time I held the crisp bills, my chest tightened. These were not just wages of survival. They were proof of betrayal, proof that the people I loved most had once decided I did not deserve even this. My son's letters arrived occasionally, his words shaky, remorse dripping from every line. "Ma, I see your face every night. I hear your voice in court. I cannot undo what I have done, but I beg you to remember me as your son." I kept the letters folded neatly in my ledger, between pages filled with testimony and receipts. Sometimes I read them in the still hours before dawn, the tears soaking into the paper until the ink blurred. I wanted to forgive. God knows, I wanted to. But forgiveness is not a switch to be flipped. It is a wound that must scar slowly, painfully, if at all. My daughter-in-law did not write. Word reached me through neighbors. She remained as bitter as ever, blaming me for her downfall, cursing my name in whispers behind prison walls. I no longer wasted breath on her memory. Her absence was enough of a gift. And yet, despite everything, loneliness wrapped around me like a heavy shawl. Justice had silenced the theft, but not the emptiness. The house echoed with silence, every creak a reminder of footsteps that no longer came. Sometimes, I would lay out a second bowl at dinner, staring at the empty seat across from me, remembering the boy who once filled it with laughter. One evening, as twilight washed the sky in shades of violet, I walked into the garden. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, their fragrance clinging to the air. I knelt by the oldest bush, planted with my husband so many years ago. I fought, my love, I whispered to the earth. I brought the truth into the light. They could not erase me. My fingers brushed the soil, cool and damp. But tell me, what good is justice when it costs a mother her child? The wind answered only with rustling leaves. Later I sat by the window, pen poised above my ledger. I wrote slowly, deliberately, each word carved with the weight of finality. Justice has been served. My pension is mine again, but my family is broken, and no court can restore it. I am both victor and victim, both strong and wounded. Perhaps this is what it means to live long, to see that even when truth prevails, the heart does not always heal. I closed the book and pressed it to my chest. Outside, the night deepened, the stars blinking faintly above. Life would continue. Markets to visit, bills to pay, roses to tend. The world would move forward, even if part of me remained frozen in that courtroom, staring at the tear-streaked face of my only son. Justice had given me back my dignity, but dignity is cold comfort when weighed against the warmth of a child's love. I leaned back, letting the darkness settle around me. Perhaps someday forgiveness would come not as a gift to them, but as a mercy for myself. Until then, I lived in the space between victory and loss, carrying both like stones in my heart. The pension would arrive again next month, and the month after that, the roses would bloom again next spring. Life, stubborn as ever, would go on. But sometimes in the stillness of night, I found myself whispering a question into the emptiness. Did I truly win? Or did I only survive? The silence never answered. And perhaps it never would.